I don't know about you, but I find myself looking up for something all the time. And I don't know if it's God or something else, but something, just something to help me get through. I remember a moment about a decade ago, and I was talking with my spiritual director. And she had invited me to do some kind of reflecting on what I was feeling in my body, and you know how those spiritual directors are. Maybe you don't, but you know, one of those people you talk to gets you to look inside. And I was feeling really in a lot of pain from my session with my personal trainer I was working with the day before, and I knew that he had overdone it, and I was really struggling to figure out how to work with this guy because he was a young guy. I wanted to measure up, and he was kind of putting the pressure on. But so I was talking to my spiritual director about how to work with my personal trainer, and then I realized that I was paying one person to talk to me about how to talk to another person. I was paying all to do something that I already knew I needed to do. Meanwhile, she was giving me, good advice about, well, you can just tell him you only do half of the reps that he says you should do. Boy, this trying to live lives of integrity, joy, and service, they can get expensive, can't it? But there's this desperation to it. I remember in that conversation, both those people I was working with, this desperate need, this looking up. There must be something somewhere. It makes me think of the way that the theologian Marcus Borg talks about the word for faith. He says that the Hebrew word for faith in the Old Testament is emunah. Emunah. And he says what makes the word interesting is that it's the sound a baby donkey makes when it's crying for its mother. Emunah. I think he says to appreciate that, you have to say emunah so that it sounds like that. If you want to hear the meaning of emunah, you have to say it like it's braying. I sometimes think to myself, he says, if you say it soft, it's almost like braying, like praying. The point that faith in the Hebrew Bible is like a baby donkey calling out or crying for its mother. So there's something kind of wonderful about that. There's an element, I don't know if you want to say desperation in it or not, but there's certainly an element of confidence also that the cry will be heard. An element of perhaps desperation and also of confidence that the cry will be heard. I don't think baby donkeys are the only babies who make that kind of cry. Emunah. It was what I was thinking about a few years ago, a moment that I'm sure most of you remember when a young woman named Greta Thunberg spoke to the whole world. At 16 years old, she said, "This is all wrong," to the gathered luminaries, leaders from around the world. "This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. I shouldn't be here, yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you," she said. "You've stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And yet, I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?" Emunah. To imagine a hopeful future, to seek some kind of salvation, in the face of what is unquestionably reasonable despair is an act of faith. And when we think about it this way, faith, it's not about belief. It's not about believing that something that I'm going to do is what makes the difference. It's about a choice. It's not about trying to hold on to certainty in the face of doubt, but rather it's a calling out in that confident desperation, calling out with our lives in hope in the face of despair. This idea that faith is a choice, it's actually the conclusion I took from reading that philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who was in that milieu of 19th century German liberal theological thought. When he was wrestling with questions of ultimate truth as part of that philosophical, theological movement, he was trying to identify what are the limits of reason, of coming to a rational belief to act upon. And basically the conclusion I think he came to is you can't use reason. For him, he was all in relationship to the Christian story. You can't use reason to disprove the Christian story. And I have to tell you, when I read him, being raised UU among good, hard-thinking, rationalist, humanist types, his conclusion did not sit well with me, so much so that my professor knew that something must have upset me to get my thinking out of whack when I turned in my paper, and he was not pleased with it. You might disbelieve the stories of miracles, of certain events having happened based on reason, he argues. And I've come to agree, though, that you can't, however, whether you reject the idea that God exists and incarnated God's self in Jesus to show love and open a way, you can't make that call. It's not a rationalizing intellect that's given you that reasonable conclusion, but rather a choice. A choice not to believe. For Kierkegaard, believing or disbelieving in the Christian God, the story of Christ, it's a choice, a leap of faith, either way. And so what I took away, and you know, you can read the pages and pages of ink spilled on this question, but I think this is an important way of seeing the question. We all make choices about where to place our faith every day. We can't help it. The way Emerson put it was, a person will worship something, have no doubt about that. And what we worship, we become. So these are subtle choices, not often made in the conscious mind, but instinctual, rooted in the beliefs and narratives that we hold about the world. Choices about where to put our faith. And it's true that where we place our faith matters. So faith, it's not an articulation of belief, it's about where we put our attention, with the intentions we hold about the choices that we make about where to put our bodies, what to do with them. It's Yom Kippur now, this second holiday in the Jewish High Holy Days. And so the practice of atonement is on my mind, of carefully sifting through a difficult situation, perhaps the whole past year, to find what piece of it is mine. And I think that this practice, this call, this religious call to once and again, every year, look back, examine our lives. It's a practice rooted in that unreasonable faith that our lives and our choices matter. Choosing to put faith in that. Yom Kippur, it's to seek forgiveness by seeking a shelter in our own limitation, to acknowledge that we did not build our own roof, that we mess up over and over, and that because it matters, because we hold faith that our choices, the impact of our action matters, we must seek shelter under a roof we did not build. I found that the more money I have, the more money I spend trying to find in desperate plea that thing that will save my life. On coaches and therapists, on my yoga membership. I never thought I was not going to be a yoga person. My wife helped me understand now that I didn't have to be a yoga person. I could just be a person who goes to yoga. But I did. I started going to yoga, and I've kept going. I go to my weekly yoga class just once a week. I don't do yoga any other time. But I go faithfully to my weekly yoga class. And I don't know exactly why. I know I need something there. I know I've got body problems and aches and pains, and I want to live a long and robust life. And I'm not sure that my weekly yoga class is going to get me there. But I seem to be placing my faith there nonetheless. When I would gather sometimes new members of a congregation for a class we'd call Starting Point, I would ask them to please, let's go on a spectrum about beliefs, and we'd talk about different ideas that they might have, religious ideas or backgrounds, to go to one side of the room for another. And one of them would always be, go to this side of the room if you have been saved, and this side of the room if that idea does not speak to you. And as you might imagine among Unitarian Universalists, no one cared for the idea of having been saved. None of us here needs saving, right? It's that old quip, actually, that the Universalists, the Universalist side, they believed that God was too good to damn anyone to hell, while the Unitarian side believed that they were too good to be damned to hell. Maybe there's a reason we kept Unitarian first. It was actually, there's a long history there. There was a class question, but more to come about that. No matter how privileged we might be, no matter what circumstances life has given us to try and use money or whatever means to save ourselves, I do think every one of us needs saving over and over again, not in some existential for all time, in some other realm beyond this one, but here and now, day to day. What is saving your life? With the impossibility of being human, with the body problems or the relationship problems or the money problems or the family problems or the feeling problems, this being human, we find problems to struggle with. And so what are you saved by? May you be saved by a yoga class or a walk in the woods, by a cup of tea or a phone call with a friend, by a neighbor's garden, by the welcome of leaves. May you be saved by ripe tomatoes and fresh basil. May you be saved by cultivating milkweed for monarchs or bronze-leafed fennel for swallowtails. May you be saved by watching persimmons ripen on the tree, by the sounds of children playing or the first sweet note of a favorite album. May we be saved by a glimpse of the squirrel preparing for winter, by the steadfast evergreen, by the bright blue feathers of the jay arresting your attention from its habits of worry. Maybe saved by your public library, bringing a book to the branch closest to your home, by the smile shared by a clerk at the grocery store, by a hand reaching out to hold yours, even for a few seconds, even if it's the only hand you will hold this week, however heavy the burden you carry, however ordinary the problems you face, whatever you need to be saved from, the world reaches out to you. Have faith. Cry back in desperation and with hope. Emunah. May it be so. And amen.